It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my manager sent a meeting invite with no subject line and no explanation. If you have worked in an office long enough, you already know the strange feeling that kind of meeting creates. You walk into the room already predicting the conversation, already rehearsing what you will say and what you will not say. Your manager explains a plan you quietly disagree with, and you realize you probably have a better solution. But instead of challenging the idea, you nod slowly, smile politely, and tell yourself this is not the moment. Duri, not because you lack confidence, and not because your idea is weak, but because rent is due soon. 10 days from now, your landlord expects a payment, and suddenly this meeting feels more important than your opinion. I used to think that reaction meant something was wrong with my confidence or personality at work. Later, I realized something uncomfortable, because the real problem had nothing to do with courage or communication skills. The real problem was mathematics, and specifically the fragile math behind most people's financial lives. I opened my banking app that morning out of habit and started calculating something I had never calculated before. If my job disappeared today, how long would my current savings actually keep my life functioning normally? At the time, I had about $18,000 saved, which sounded responsible and even slightly impressive. But when I listed my real monthly expenses, the number began shrinking faster than I expected. My rent alone was about $1,650, and health insurance added another $400 each month. Groceries, transportation, utilities, and basic living costs quietly pushed the monthly total close to $2,900. Suddenly, that $18,000 no longer felt like safety. It felt like a temporary delay before problems arrived. When I divided the numbers honestly, I realized my financial runway was about 6 months at best. And that realization created a very specific kind of pressure that follows you into meetings and daily decisions. Because when your survival depends on your paycheck, every conversation with your boss suddenly carries invisible weight. That pressure changes how you speak, how you negotiate, and sometimes even what dreams you quietly allow yourself to consider. I started noticing something strange about people who seemed calmer in the exact same situations that stressed me. They were not necessarily smarter, richer, or more talented, but they behaved as if the stakes felt lower. At first, I assumed they simply had better emotional control or years of professional experience. Then I discovered a small financial detail that quietly separated their reality from mine. Some of them were receiving consistent passive income every month, whether they showed up to work or not. Not millions of dollars and not early retirement levels, just a few $1,000s arriving reliably each month. That observation forced me to rethink something fundamental about how financial security actually works in real life. Most people believe the goal is becoming wealthy, but the real turning point happens much earlier than that. There is a surprisingly small number that changes how a normal working adult experiences everyday decisions. Darida. For many people living in the United States today, that invisible threshold is around $3,000 each month. Not because $3,000 makes you rich, but because it quietly covers the foundation of survival. When basic survival is covered, something powerful happens to the way your brain processes risk and opportunity. Before we go deeper into that idea, it helps to understand the financial reality most Americans live with today. According to the Federal Reserve's 2024 report on economic well-being, 37% of adults cannot cover a $400 emergency. That number surprises people because $400 is not a catastrophic financial disaster in theory. But in practice, it often represents a broken car, a medical bill, or an appliance failing at home. When households cannot absorb those small shocks, every unexpected expense creates stress and sometimes expensive debt. The Bank of America Institute reported in 2024 that roughly 58% of households live paycheck to paycheck. That means millions of people are one disrupted paycheck away from immediate financial instability. And the uncomfortable truth is that many of those households actually earn decent incomes on paper. Some families making over $100,000 per year still report living paycheck to paycheck today. This happens because modern expenses rise quietly, while people assume their salary automatically creates stability. Housing costs have climbed sharply across many cities, and healthcare expenses continue rising faster than wages. Groceries, insurance, childcare, transportation, and taxes slowly expand until a paycheck barely holds everything together. When that fragile balance depends completely on one job, every workplace decision begins to feel dangerous. Suddenly speaking honestly in meetings, negotiating salary, or changing careers starts to feel like financial gambling. That is the invisible psychological pressure created by living without a financial floor beneath your life. And that is exactly where the idea of $3,000 in passive income becomes interesting. Because this number is not about luxury lifestyles, expensive vacations, or retiring early on a beach somewhere. It is about covering the basic survival layer of your life before your job even enters the equation. To understand why, we need to look at what basic survival actually costs in the United States today. The MIT Living Wage Calculator estimates that a single adult needs roughly $2,300 to $2,900 monthly. That estimate includes housing, food, transportation, healthcare, taxes, and other necessary expenses for basic functioning. Notice what it does not include, because vacations, luxury purchases, and lifestyle upgrades are not part of survival. Those numbers simply represent the cost of keeping the lights on and maintaining a stable everyday life. When passive income reaches around $3,000 each month, something subtle but powerful begins changing. Your basic survival expenses become covered even if your employer suddenly disappears from your financial picture. That shift transforms your relationship with work because the paycheck is no longer the only thing protecting you. And once that psychological pressure disappears, the way you think about decisions starts changing dramatically. To understand this shift more clearly, I want to introduce you to two people whose lives look identical at first glance. The first person is me, Alex, 34 years old, working as a project manager, earning about $72,000 annually. I pay my bills on time, save occasionally, and generally consider myself responsible with money. On paper, everything about my financial life appears stable and relatively normal for someone living in a mid-sized American city. I have around $18,000 saved, which many people would consider a respectable emergency fund. But my entire financial system depends completely on one thing continuing every 2 weeks. That thing is my paycheck, and without it, the entire structure begins collapsing faster than expected. Now let me introduce Marcus, someone whose life initially looks almost identical to mine. Marcus is also 34 years old and works a similar job earning about the same annual salary. From the outside, we appear financially indistinguishable, living in similar apartments and driving similarly practical cars. But Marcus spent the last 8 years quietly building several small streams of passive income. He owns a modest dividend portfolio, 2 rental properties, and a small digital product related to his profession. None of these assets alone are dramatic or life-changing when viewed individually. However, together, they generate roughly $3,100 every month regardless of Marcus showing up to work. That number happens to sit just above the survival threshold we discussed earlier in this video. And that small difference creates 2 completely different experiences of everyday life between Marcus and me. When Marcus walks into a meeting with his manager, his financial survival is not tied to the outcome. If the conversation goes poorly or the company restructures tomorrow, Marcus still has income arriving automatically. That psychological safety changes how confidently he speaks, negotiates, and evaluates opportunities at work. Meanwhile, my decisions still carry the quiet awareness that my rent depends entirely on staying employed. At first, I assumed Marcus simply had a more confident personality or stronger professional instincts than I did. But over time, I realized the real difference was not personality, intelligence, or work ethic. The real difference was that Marcus was not constantly calculating financial survival in the background of every decision. Without that pressure running quietly inside your mind, your brain suddenly has more space to think clearly. This is not just a philosophical idea, because research has actually measured how financial stress affects cognition. A well-known study published in the journal Science examined how scarcity influences cognitive performance. Researchers tested participants with financial problems and compared their performance on problem-solving tasks. The results showed that financial stress can reduce cognitive performance, equivalent to losing about 13 IQ points temporarily. That does not mean people become less intelligent, but it shows how stress consumes mental bandwidth. When your mind constantly calculates bills, rent, and emergencies, fewer resources remain for strategic thinking. Kjorinder. In other words, financial pressure quietly occupies part of your brain every single day. This is why people experiencing financial insecurity often struggle to plan long-term investments or career moves. Their brain is solving the immediate survival puzzle instead of exploring better long-term opportunities. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a scarcity mindset created by constant resource pressure. And that scarcity mindset makes people naturally more cautious, more defensive, and more resistant to risk. Reyes. Ironically, the people who most need change often feel least able to pursue it. When Marcus disagrees with a manager or explores a new opportunity, his brain is not processing survival anxiety. That freedom allows him to evaluate decisions more rationally instead of emotionally reacting to potential income loss. Over time, those small differences in daily decisions begin creating dramatically different long-term outcomes. And this is exactly why crossing that $3,000 passive income threshold becomes such a powerful shift. Dury. The first major change happens in your career decisions, often in ways that feel subtle but powerful. When your survival no longer depends entirely on a single paycheck, conversations at work begin sounding different. You start asking questions, suggesting ideas, and occasionally disagreeing instead of quietly accepting every decision. This is not reckless behavior, because financial stability simply removes the fear that normally silences people. Without that fear dominating your thinking, your professional confidence becomes grounded in reality instead of anxiety. The second change appears in your health, particularly in the invisible stress people carry about money. The American Psychological Association regularly reports that money remains one of the leading stress sources for adults. Chronic financial anxiety keeps the body producing cortisol, the stress hormone associated with long-term health risks. When a financial floor exists, the body slowly exits survival mode and daily stress begins decreasing. People often describe sleeping better once they know their basic expenses remain covered regardless of employment. Duys. The third change appears when unexpected expenses arrive, because emergencies stop feeling like personal disasters. Imagine your car suddenly needs a $900 repair during an ordinary week. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, that event creates weeks of anxiety and sometimes high-interest debt. But for someone with passive income covering survival expenses, the same repair becomes an inconvenience instead of crisis. The difference is not wealth, because the difference is simply financial breathing room. Inchio. That breathing room prevents small problems from cascading into long-lasting financial setbacks. Over time, this stability creates emotional space that allows better long-term decisions about money and work. Instead of reacting to emergencies, people begin planning, investing, and negotiating with clearer thinking. Those improved decisions accumulate slowly, but over years, they produce dramatically different financial trajectories. And that leads directly into the fourth major way passive income quietly transforms everyday life. Dacurrent. The fourth major change appears inside relationships, where money quietly influences more conversations than most couples expect. Studies on relationship satisfaction consistently show that financial stress ranks among the most common causes of conflict. Many arguments that appear to involve vacations, purchases, or budgets are actually about fear and uncertainty. When both partners feel financially fragile, even small spending decisions can trigger defensive reactions. But when a basic financial floor exists, those conversations become calmer and more rational. Instead of arguing about survival, couples begin discussing goals, priorities, and long-term plans together. The fifth and perhaps most powerful change appears in how people invest their money. Financial markets naturally rise and fall, sometimes dramatically, creating fear among investors who rely on investments for survival. During market downturns, many individuals panic and sell investments to protect short-term financial security. Research from Dalbar shows that emotional market timing reduces average investor returns by roughly 1 to 2% annually. That performance gap might sound small, but over decades it compounds into enormous differences in wealth. Investors with a financial floor behave differently because they do not need their investments to pay immediate bills. When markets decline, they often remain calm or even continue investing while prices are temporarily lower. This patient behavior allows compounding to work uninterrupted for long periods of time. Over many years, that difference in behavior can easily produce hundreds of thousands of additional dollars. Dui. The remarkable part is that the advantage did not come from intelligence or complicated strategies. It came simply from removing survival pressure that normally forces poor financial decisions. That insight raises an obvious question many people are probably thinking right now. If $3,000 in passive income changes so much, how can someone realistically build it? The answer is less glamorous than most people expect, but also more achievable than it first appears. The first thing most people imagine is earning passive income entirely from dividend investing in stocks. While dividends can absolutely contribute, relying on them alone usually requires a very large investment portfolio. For example, many diversified dividend ETFs currently yield roughly 3 to 4% annually. At a 4% yield, generating $3,000 per month requires approximately $900,000 invested. For most people, that amount of capital feels unrealistic at the beginning of their financial journey. That is why many successful investors build passive income using several different sources simultaneously. A common approach combines dividend investments, real estate income, and smaller digital or business assets. For example, a $300,000 dividend portfolio yielding 4% produces roughly $1,000 monthly. 2 modest rental properties might generate another $700 to $800 after expenses and maintenance. A small digital product, online course, or licensing income could contribute another several $100s monthly. Tuainkis. None of these streams alone appears life-changing when you look at them individually. But when combined, they gradually form a stable financial floor supporting your everyday expenses. This approach also reduces risk because your income no longer depends on one single asset. If one stream temporarily declines, the others continue providing stability and financial breathing room. Building this kind of structure rarely happens quickly and usually requires years of consistent effort. Many people underestimate how powerful steady contributions and compounding can become over time. Marcus did not build his $3,000 of passive income overnight or through lucky investments. Instead, he built it slowly through 8 years of disciplined saving, investing, and experimenting with small opportunities. And that gradual process leads to one final insight about why this invisible financial line matters so much. Because the goal of $3,000 in passive income is not actually about stopping work entirely. The real purpose of reaching $3,000 in passive income is eliminating the constant fear that surrounds money. When survival is covered, your relationship with work shifts from obligation and silence into deliberate choice and calm confidence. You may still work hard, but your motivation becomes growth and curiosity, not the panic of rent deadlines. Many people think passive income means quitting forever, but most are simply trying to stop being financially trapped. With a financial floor, you keep working, yet you start choosing projects that fit your values and energy. That shift often improves performance, because decisions come from creativity and clarity instead of constant self-protection mode. Several guaranteed income experiments show a similar pattern. When people feel safe, they take smarter risks sooner again. A small stable payment does not erase ambition. It reduces stress, letting people pursue better jobs or businesses. Financial stability does not make you lazy. It removes the background anxiety that blocks long-term planning today. Once survival worries fade, you finally have mental space to learn, negotiate, invest, and build meaningful goals consistently. This reminds me of Charlie Munger's idea about compounding. The first rule is never interrupt it unnecessarily ever. Panic selling during downturns interrupts compounding, and the cost is invisible until years later when totals diverge widely. A financial floor lets you keep investing through uncertainty because bills are covered even when markets feel scary. Over decades, uninterrupted compounding quietly turns ordinary contributions into serious wealth, far beyond what effort alone produces often. But the most valuable return is not the dollars. It is the ability to make decisions without fear. The greatest dividend money pays is controlling your time, your boundaries, and the direction of your life daily. When fear disappears, everyday choices start reflecting who you truly are, not what your paycheck demands anymore inside. That invisible line at $3,000 a month marks the moment freedom begins, quietly, in ordinary Tuesday meetings. So the question is not whether it matters, but whether you will start building your floor this year. Every dollar you invest today buys back future options until you can finally speak and choose freely again. It is so.